Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we are going to learn how to protect a given REST endpoint from being accessed by unauthenticated users. For example, this lessons data endpoint. Let's modify it. Let's make sure that only users that are currently logged in can view this data. Unauthenticated users should see an empty screen. Let's add then authentication logic to our backend without having to repeat it on multiple places. We are going to do that by using an express middleware. In order to see how we are going to protect this data here, let's head over to the read all lessons route. So just as a reminder, this route gets triggered here. If we do a request to /API/lessons, then we are going to trigger this route. Now we could add here at the level of this route some logic to see is the user authenticated. If not, send back a 403 forbidden like we were doing before. There is actually a better way, which is we are going to do that via middleware. And we're going to apply that middleware that forbids access to certain routes only to the routes that are private to an authenticated user. In order to do that, we are going to define here a new middleware. We are going to call it authentication middleware. And we are going to call the file name auth.middleware.ts. Then we are going to create here the skeleton to this middleware. So it's going to be called check if authenticated. And as usual is going to take the request, the response and the next function. Now let's see, before implementing it, how would we plug it into the definition of our middleware chain. So this middleware is going to return a 403 forbidden if the user is not authenticated. So we cannot make it a global middleware like we did here. We need to make it a middleware specific of the route. So we are going to add it here at the level of this particular route that we know that we want to protect access to. But for example, the sign up and the login routes, we don't want to add this middleware because by definition the user is not yet logged in. We can, just in case, add this here to the logout call. And the question at this point is, should we also protect here the user route, the get user route? Now, this route is being called at application startup time. It's being called in the client authentication service. So we are going to open the service here and we're going to see this is being called here at the constructor of the service. So this request is always going to be made. We could still throw a 403, but in this case we are going to let the request go through and we are going to leave the current logic, which is return 204 no content if we could not determine the user. So with this in place, let's then implement the check if authenticated middleware. So this middleware has been executed after the retrieve user by ID. And this has only populated here the request with the user ID if it managed to find a JSON Web Token and if the user is still logged in, meaning that the JSON Web Token is not expired. Let's first handle the case where the JWT contained valid user information and user ID is filled in. So if that is the case, we are simply going to call next, and if this value is not present, it means one of several things. Either the cookie was not present or it contained the JSON Web Token that was either invalid or expired. So in that case, we are going to bypass the rest of the middleware chain. We are going to send directly a 403 forbidden. This code indicates that the request failed due to security reasons, but the response body does not contain further information that could help an attacker. At this point, we are almost ready to try our new implementation. Let's just go here to the get user route. So before we were sending both the email and the ID, so let's keep the same logic. This is the payload that the front end would be expecting. With this in place, we would have a working get user route. And one last thing to fix here at the level of the user middleware here. What would happen if there would be no cookie with the session ID? So if there would be no cookie, then the middleware chain would be blocked and the HTTP request would hang. So we need to make sure to call next in this case when the session ID cookie was not present. So in general, if you run into a situation where you have a hanging HTTP request in an Express server, this is a common cause. And with this in place, we are ready to try this new version of the server. So we are going to refresh the application. Let's have a look here at the log to see what is going on. Let's then, as usual, create a user. We are going to hit sign up. So we have access here to the lessons data. Now, if we refresh the application, we still have access to the lessons data. However, if we wait for the token to expire or we hit logout, then we can no longer view the data. So it's not just a matter of the data being hidden at the level of the UI. If we reload the application, no data is visible to the user. And if you want to make sure that the data is indeed protected, we can use here the REST client. So then let's do an HTTP GET. We are going to be hitting the localhost port 9000. This is the port where our REST server is running. We're going to be using HTTPS. Let's see what happens if we go to /API/lessons, which is a forbidden route for unauthenticated users. So let's try this out. If we hit submit request, we are going to get back a 403 forbidden, which is the expected result. So this shows that this API endpoint that returns the lessons data is protected against unauthenticated users via the check if authenticated middleware. Other types of requests will go through because this middleware is not global, it's only applied to certain routes. With this in place, our JWT based authentication system is almost completed. Let's now implement the login page.